Well, good morning, everybody. I'm glad that you came this morning, despite the fact that it's getting darker. What's up with that? Right? I'm driving down here. I live up in Louisville, Ohio, and I woke up this morning and I get up and I'm like, man, it's getting darker and darker. My wife reminded me, she goes, dummy, you woke up half hour earlier than you normally do. So I was like, okay, you don't have that. My name is Todd Hixenbaugh. I am a podcaster. I am a pastor. I am a producer. I produce several different shows for clients. And basically, I like to have a good time. So if you do too, we're going to go on this ride. It's going to be an amazing morning. If you don't, then just sit quietly because the rest of us are going to have a great time. So I'm glad to be able to hang out with you. Before I start, I'm just curious, because I'm always curious whenever I speak in front of rooms about who I'm talking to. And so just quick show of hands. Business owners, you own a business, business owners. Of that, agencies, anybody? Agency, marketing, any of that? And marketing, there we go. Anybody who's just a solopreneur. So somebody, yep, I knew that one. Anything else that I didn't cover? Shout it out. Sales, great. What is it? Sales, got it. No, I'm just always curious. That I appreciate that. What you guys do is super important, right? It's something that honestly makes the American economy turn. It's the thing that makes basically any economy go in the entire world. And so what you do is incredibly, incredibly important. So this morning, my goal is to help you just a little bit. I know a little bit about a little bit, and I want to share that with you. So let's get into this thing. Tyler asked me, he said, you do this podcasting thing, right? Which is usually how these conversations happen when people talk to me. They're like, you do that thing. It's like Rogan, right? It's like that Joe Rogan thing. He sits around and talks with his buddies and gets drunk and does all sorts of things. Well, kind of, but not really. And so he said, what if you come and talk and talk about storytelling in marketing? And kind of talk about what it is that you've learned in your time as being a podcaster. And I've been doing this now. I started my first podcast in 2016. Just kept right on rolling. So I think that podcast is a little over 300 episodes now. And so he's like, talk about that. Why don't you talk about what you've learned, what you can do with storytelling, and how it applies to marketing. These are business people. They're bottom line people. And they're going to really want you to break down for them how it is they can market whatever it is they do through the power of storytelling. The other thing that I do later today, when I leave here, I'm going to go to a church. I work at a church, and I'm a children's pastor. That's what I do. It's my day job. And with that comes a lot of storytelling. Before I became a Christian, I was a professional lie teller because I was a kid and I like to exaggerate the truth. And so I'm really well versed whenever it comes to storytelling. Ask my mother. I got in a lot of trouble. So, storytelling. My wife, whenever we were dating, she began talking about rings. And every woman does this at some point. And they start just hinting at things, right? And it's, I really would like something low profile, or I really like this cut, or I like these different things. And I was like, okay, I'm hearing you. And so as we were continuing to go on, one day we were walking by a jewelry store, and she goes, let's just have fun. Let's just take a look. Men, you know what I'm talking about. Women, you also know what I'm talking about, but different reasons. And so we go in and whatever, it's a salesperson, sales guys. And whatever, so they start their spiel, and he says something really interesting to me. He goes, do you know the 5 C's are? No, not really. What is that? And he goes, well, when you're looking at diamonds, when you're looking at jewelry, there's 5 things you should be looking at in the gem. And I'm like, oh boy, here we go. Like, this is going to be a good one. So he goes into it. He's like, cut and clarity and care, all this stuff. And my wife's just eating it up. She's just like, yeah, listen to him. And I'm just seeing money. And he finishes his spiel, and we start looking, and whatever. She shows me this ring. She's like, that's the one. That's what I want. So I told her to go out to the food court, and I bought it because I'm a sucker. And as we were driving home, I started thinking about it, and I thought, storytelling is a lot like those 5 C's that guy was was telling me about. You see, we think of storytelling as children's tales, right? We think of it as these master craftsmen weaving these tales and being able to put things together. Quite honestly, storytelling is just talking. It's communicating, which is what we do when we market things, by the way. It's what you do all the time when you talk to clients, whenever you run ads for things. It's what you do all the time. We all are marketing ourselves in different ways. See, when parents and families come into the church I work at, that's what I do. What do I start doing? First thing, what's your name? Hi, my name's Todd. And we start the story. And so I said, all right, let's do the 5 C's of storytelling. So that this morning is what we're going to do. Is we're going to go through the 5 C's, what I call the 5 C's of storytelling. And I'll go through them and tell you what they are before we start. The 5 C's of storytelling are clarity, connection, creativity, call, and then cue, C-U-E. So clarity, connection, creativity, call, and cue. Let's start with the first one, clarity. Now this guy, when he started his spiel about the diamonds, the first thing he talks to me about, he says, Todd, it's really important about the clarity. And there's a whole bunch of different reasons why, but basically, the more clear these diamonds are, all these different things, it increases the value of the diamond. How many of you have ever run a bad ad or done marketing that just sucked? You fell flat on your face, and later you're dissecting it and you're going, whoo, that was not good. Or you had somebody audit you, right? Do a 360 review. When I was an intern, Kevin West, many of you know him. He was a guy I was working for. And so he had me preach a sermon, but Kevin did this weird thing. If you know him, you understand what I'm talking about. He does weird things all the time. He has a stand, right, as interns. I'm 18 years old. He has a stand up in this room. It's just him sitting in a chair, all right? And he says, preach me a sermon. What? I was at the time a Bible student, so I'm like, okay, I could figure this out. And it was the muddiest sermon to this day, that I've ever preached. And at the end of it, he goes, I have not a dang clue what you just said to me. He's like, Todd, you got to be more clear. What are you talking about? What do you want people to get from what you're communicating? And so it's the same thing, right? This guy's talking about clarity and how it increases the value. Same thing with what Kevin said. You have to be clear in what you're communicating. A good story is often simple. Some of the best stories that has ever existed are the most simple stories. If I talk to you about the big bad wolf, you know the story. We all do. Why? It's simple. It's short. There's a clear enemy. There's a clear hero. If I say Cinderella, we all know exactly what I'm talking about. Why? It's a simple story. Storytelling at its core is simply communicating a message and being super clear in what we're saying. How do we do that? How do we do that effectively? Clarity often comes from, Joe Rogan says this all the time whenever he's working on stand-up, and I've heard a lot of stand-up comedians say this. They talk about how it's like hammering out a samurai sword, if you've ever seen that process. And what they're actually doing when they keep bending and folding the metal, and they're beating it, is they're getting the impurities out. They're making it and smoothing it out and making it stronger. It's working our craft. Stories, whenever I was a kid, when I was in trouble, and I go to my mom and I start telling her lies, it's the same thing repeated over and over again, and so you almost believe it yourself. It's storytelling. It's clear. And as we begin to bend and shape and mold our message, the short ones are what stick out. Nike, just do it. Chick-fil-A. We all know the catchphrases. It's clarity that can be distilled into simple phrases that your clients and your customers can understand. They can grasp it. They understand what you're saying. It's an inherent thing. As we grow in our storytelling ability, clarity is key. I was telling Tyler this before we started. Clients will come to me and they'll say, hey, I have this podcast idea, which by the way, that I hear that a lot And my first reaction is always, all right, so what is it? You going in your garage? Are you drinking beer? What are you doing? Are you eating pizza? Is it your friends from college? What's the thing? And the funny part is it always kind of comes down to that, is it's, I just want to hang out and want to talk. What they don't understand is that the good podcasts, the ones that truly, truly capture people's attention, all the storytelling podcasts, the interview podcasts that are at the top of the food chain, Russell Brand, all these different people, the reason they're so good is because their messaging is clear. There's clarity in it. If I say Russell Brand and you know anything about his podcast that he runs, it's called Under the Skin. What he's doing is very clear. He is getting underneath things. He's asking really difficult questions to really smart people. And when you turn on his podcast, you can get that immediately from his questions. His producer's really good, but his questions, the way he phrases them, everything is super clear and transparent. And it makes sense for the brand he's projecting. Under the skin. Clarity, super, super important. As you are marketing, as you are talking with clients, if you do nothing else on my list, if you make it clear, it sells. Every time. It always will sell. Let that eraser go. Oh. The next C on our list. Incredibly, incredibly important. Connection. Now, Todd, why would you include connection? Why is social media called social media?
It's supposed to be social.
It's supposed to be social. You got it exactly. You might have the best product in the world. You might do. You might offer the greatest services ever as a coach. You might be able to market your socks off. You might be able to sell anything, whatever it is. But if you're not connecting with people, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how good it is. It doesn't matter how good your messaging is. If you're not connected to people, it doesn't matter. One of the best ways to do that is through storytelling. So how do we connect somebody with our stories? Well, one of the best connectors that I know is my mother. Now, my mom is a housewife, was my whole life. And she actually started a job recently. And in her job, basically one of the big things that she is she's really an event planner. It's kind of what she does. And my mom has no training, has no skill in this particular field. She was a preschool teacher part-time my whole life. And she's really successful at it. And one day I took her for coffee and we were just chatting and she was telling me, just about life and what all's been going on. And I said, Mom, you keep getting promoted. Tell me about that. Why? What are you doing? Did I miss something when I was growing up? Like, did you have some superpower that I just didn't know about? Are you, like, what is this? And she told me, she goes, Todd, it's interesting because for me, it's all about building teams. It's about connecting to people. It's about figuring out what the problem is, matching it up with a solution, or matching it up with a person who has a solution. And she's like, that's really all that I do. With all these events, we have to coordinate caterers and we have to coordinate bands and all these different people and all of that. And she goes, the interesting thing is if you just know who it is that you need for the problem that you're facing or the thing that the client wants to deal with, it's not that hard. You just have to make the connection. You have to make the phone call, send the email, whatever it is. It's not that hard. I was like, actually, Mom, that's actually very hard. That's very insightful. And so as I was thinking about storytelling in these C's, I said connection is incredibly important. You see, you have a connection to your brand, to the product that you sell, to the thing that you do. You made it, or you've taken the ball that somebody's handed you and you've continued running it down the field. You already have a connection to it. Your customers don't. They're flat-footed. They're standing. They're judging whether or not they should even buy into what you're selling. So you have to connect them. How do you do that? Through storytelling. Well, you have to allow people to be able to see themselves in the story that you're telling. What problem are they facing? Do you have a solution for it? Do you have a solution for it? Did you ever try to sell a pair of scissors to somebody with no hands? No, you wouldn't. But What if you could make scissors that they could use with their feet, or scissors that they could use with different types of controls that they could control with their arms? Now we're talking. See, now we have a product that solves a real problem. What about this? In the 90s, after Steve Jobs had gotten out of Apple and he was leading Pixar, he comes into the company, and the company at the time, before Toy Story really happened, it was a floundering thing. He was one of the founders and one of the people getting it started, but it was floundering. And what he realized is that one of the major reasons is that they weren't designing and putting teams in places that were going to win. And so he began to think through how he could connect his employees to the greater vision of what they were trying to accomplish. He began to let them be creative on their own. He began to allow them to design their own spaces. He even began to allow them to have more creative control in certain areas that they were in charge of. And what he found was when he allowed his employees and the people who he was working with to have creative input, buy-in to the product, productivity went up. Allow your customers, your clients, to feel as though they're part of the story. You do that through solving their problems. You do that through empathy, empathizing with them, helping them to see a bigger vision than what they currently are seeing. One of the things that I do a lot with clients is I ask them, what is the problem that you're wanting to solve with your podcast? Once we get through that one, the next question that I ask them is, what vision would you explain to your mother that you have for this podcast in a way she could understand it? The next question that I ask them is, if your podcast was the only podcast in the world, would you listen to it? Why do I ask them those questions? They're all connecting questions. It's connecting them and helping them to see the value that they're providing to the people that are consuming their show. As we're doing storytelling, as we're marketing, we have to allow the people that we're talking to connect into a greater story. Some of the best marketers, people who I have known that really do great at getting the message out, they simply allow you to step into their story that they're telling. Connection. How are we connecting our clients into the story, into the product that we're selling? The third C, this is one of my favorite ones, is creativity. Why is it one of my favorite ones? I'm glad you asked. Creativity. Creativity, for some people, is magic. They don't understand how it happens. That's my wife. My wife is essentially a robot. I love her to death. She knows this. But I make the joke all the time that she's about 2 steps away from being Terminator. More reasons than one. And the reason why is because she is all input. She's all ones and zeros. For her, it's problem, it's solution. To her, I do magical things. I go into my office, I shut the door, I write in my notebook for hours at a time, and I come out and I have wild ideas. Like, Kelly, did you know that if instead of taking and saving money for our kids to have a college fund, what if instead we made a trust fund that they could access when they were 16 or 18 years old that was essentially seed money for a business? She goes, why the heck would we do that? Well, because then it could potentially be all cash for them instead of going into debt going to college. Yeah, but that doesn't make any sense to me. To her, it's magic. Why would you ever think of that? To many people, it is. To people who consider themselves creatives, you have no idea where it comes from. It's just inspiration. It's like this thing that just hits you and you don't really understand why or how or when. It just happens. And so you start to get superstitious almost with it. And it's like, I have to be sitting in this coffee shop with these headphones in, listening to Hans Zimmer, but it has to be the Interstellar playlist at this time of day, and I have to order this drink, and that barista has to make it. It's kind of weird, right? You have to understand that most of your audience thinks it's magic. Creativity is actually more like science. It's more like science. It's actually closer to how my wife functions than she thinks. For me, creativity is all about systems. And most good creatives that you talk to, it's systems based. Now, how does this work in terms of marketing? How does this work in terms of storytelling? Creativity is simply creative solutions to problems. That's all that it is. It's alternate ways of fixing problems. It's fixing them in a way that both helps the problem but does it in a cool way, or it's fixing a problem in a way that nobody else had thought of. And so for me, as I'm working with my clients, as I'm talking to them about storytelling, I'm talking to them about podcasting, and how are you going to make this idea and this idea match together, there begins to be problems. And as we're thinking through, what's your bottom line for your podcast going to be? What's your tagline? What problems are you solving? Well, if we're talking about a podcast where you're going to talk about tech all week long, I can tell you 10 podcasts that do that. There's only a couple ways to be different and stand out from the crowd. Be the best, be different, or give a different take on a common problem. Most people think that they can be the best. Maybe you can. Do you have the cash to do that? Do you have the know-how, or somebody that you can hire that has the know-how? Do you understand your problem better than everybody else? These are the things you have to consider if you're going to do that. Being different doesn't take a whole lot. Just color your hair blue. Color your hair blue, and don't wear a shirt and video record yourself and put it on Instagram. Everybody's going to follow you. They're going to go, what in the world is this person doing? It doesn't take a lot to be different. But coming up with different solutions to common problems, now we're talking, and that's creativity. As you're marketing, as you're crafting your story, as you're putting together your message, think about the problem from different angles. Putting together a marketing pitch. There's a client that wants to hire you. Maybe you're a marketing firm. What's the problem that person's facing? You know that. You've done the research. You should have, at least. If you hadn't, we have other problems. You know the problem. What's the common answer that anybody could give them? Now take that same problem and add a pandemic to it. Or add bankruptcy to it, or add whatever the problem is, and begin to work it backwards and think through how to sell something to these people in creative ways. That's all that it is. It's alternative problem solving. As you begin to do that and craft a story and craft a message, creativity at its core is alternative problem solving. Your message doesn't have to have the latest PowerPoint crazy thing. It doesn't have to include 3D and alternate reality and all sorts of other things. That's creativity, but it's not what it needs. It's helping people to see something in a different light. The third C is actually probably the one that's the most important for you. It's call. Do you know what call stands for? I don't know. It just means cash, baby. Just means cash. Call to action. Your message, we talked about clarity earlier. This is kind of part 2 of clarity. Your message, whatever it is, whatever story you're telling, whatever marketing thing you're doing, one of the things that I tell podcasters all the time is that if you have more than one call to action in any given episode, nobody's going to do anything about that episode. Nobody's going to do anything. It's kind of like the Cleveland Browns. When you have more than one quarterback, you don't have any quarterback. That's that concept. And for me, call to action, it's cash. What do you want them to do with this? Do you want them to be added to your email list? Do you want them to follow you on YouTube? Do you want them to follow you on Instagram? Do you want them to book a call? What do you want them to do? It's the most important thing I've learned from podcasting. You see, back whenever I started podcasting, there was a very standard call to action for every single episode you recorded. It was very easy. You've heard this if you've ever listened to a podcast. At the end of the show, you get to it, and they're all debriefing or whatever. And they get to it, and what do they say? Rate, review, and subscribe. Right? We've heard this. Rate, review, and subscribe. Rate, review, and subscribe. And for years, that was the call to action for every single podcast episode that you've ever listened to. Problem. Where are they rating it at? And where are they reviewing it? And where are they subscribing? Do you own those modalities? No, you don't. Apple does. Spotify does. So you're having somebody buy into something when you do that that's not something you own. And all of a sudden I started to see a shift around 2018. And all of a sudden I started listening to podcasters and they'd say, go to my website. That's interesting. Go to my website and sign up for my newsletter, or go to my website and from there you can leave a rating and write a review, or go to my website and do this. And I thought about that for a while. I was like, what are they doing? Why are they doing that? You didn't have to think about this. It was rate, review, and subscribe. You don't have to think about it. Your CTA is there. It's done. And I realized, if I'm just sending people to something that I don't own it. If they take it from me tomorrow, I've got nothing. And when I realized that, it changed the game for me. There's power in your CTA. What are you asking them to do? What do you want from this transaction? And there's all sorts of theories to that. If you follow Gary Vaynerchuk, he'll tell you jab, 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 right hook. It's a very famous book. He'll tell you that you should give, make the ask. You listen to all sorts of different marketing experts. They'll give you as many different answers as you could ever want. But what do you want from the transaction? As you're pitching, as you're marketing, as you're talking to clients, talking to customers, what do you want? Where do you want them to go? We could get into funnels. Russell Brunson does great things with funnels and talks about ClickFunnels and all those things. It's great. It's awesome. What do you want your client, your potential lead, what do you want them to do with the time that you've taken from them? What do you want them to follow? What do you want them to subscribe to? Do you want them to purchase? As you're thinking through your message, as you're crafting your story, as you're marketing, your call to action, I'm not joking when I say it's cash. It really is. All the other stuff is important. I would never say it's not. Clarity, it's incredibly important. Connection, incredibly important. Creative, we need to make sure that we're solving problems. Your call to action, that's where the cash comes from. Final one, Q. Now, Todd, what do you mean by Q? I was telling my wife these last night. She would ask me at dinner, which is always a mistake for her. It's like, don't do that. Now I have to give you a whole spiel and you're gonna get annoyed at me. She thinks I'm weird. Q, and she's like, Q like next in line? No, not next in line. Q. This really gets to the heart of how you present your message. Every good story gives cues. Every good story gives cues. How do I know that? Well, I know that because a message is always flowing in a direction. A story is always flowing. And then this happens. And then that happened. Finally, this happens. It's flowing. Do you know what irritates people? When you don't tell them what's coming. I learned this in preaching class whenever I was in Bible college. And they taught us, people get antsy around minute 37 of a sermon. You get super antsy. And the reason why is because they're kind of giving you the half hour. They'll give that to you because they're in church and they kind of know they're supposed to. It's the next 20 minutes if you take that long, which you shouldn't. But if you take the next 20 minutes, it's the hardest 20 minutes you're going to get because it's probably where you're going to put your action step that you want them to take. And so they had all sorts of different tricks of the trade of how to do that. And one of the things that they taught us is you need to begin to give very clear verbal cues. So you need to say about 2 minutes before you're going to wrap up. And finally, as I'm wrapping up, and here's what's coming next. And then this happens. And the more that you cue your audience in, the more that you let those people into what you're doing, what you're thinking, and where this thing is going, they'll come back to you. One of the best tools, one of the worst tools in public speaking is when you give a handout to people. Why? Well, the best reason is because then they can take notes. You know that it's simple, they can take it with them. Do you know what one of the worst reasons is? You get to the end of the page and they think you're done. They tune you out. So a good storyteller, a good person who's speaking, who uses one of those, knows you have about 3 minutes when you hit the end of that page until you have to wrap up or you're going to lose the crowd. That's why I don't have you notes today. Because for this room, I knew I needed to tell you some more information. There's going to be a lot more talking than visual things on the board. So I didn't give you a visual handout because, well, if I got to my last point and I didn't have enough time, I needed to suss something out a little bit more. If I'd given you a handout, you'd be done. Some of you are already saying out on there. So, as you're crafting your message, we have the call, we have creativity, we have connection, we have all of those different things, but telling people where you're going is incredibly important. That's why I told you my 5 C's at the beginning of the talk. You knew then I didn't have 10, I didn't have 12, I have 5. Let people know where the message is going. How does this play in with podcasting? One of the things I tell clients at the very beginning is I say, you need to be able to summarize the entire episode in 60 to 90 seconds. And it needs to go at the beginning. I was like, why? Because they need to know if they should listen or not. Well, Todd, they need to listen to every episode. No, they don't. You don't listen to every episode. You listen to the episodes that matter. So give them a reason to have it matter. So as you're crafting your message, as you're crafting your story, as you are crafting your pitch or whatever it is you're doing, give them cues. Let them know where it's going and let them know what to expect. All in the cues. It's how you present it matters. We know this, it's marketing. When you allow them into your process, when you allow them into what's happening, you show them where it's going, you will be more effective. You will be more effective. So, 5 C's: clarity, connection, creativity, call, and cue. If you do those 5, you work on them, that samurai sword, you hammer them out, you bend the metal back and forth, you work on that, you craft stories using these 5, your stories will be better, your marketing is going to be clearer, it's going to be better, your profit margins are going to go up. Guarantee. Thank you so much for your time today. I've really appreciated being able to do that with you and hang out. I know some of you are caffeinated, some of you aren't, so I appreciate that. Tyler told me that it's time now for Q&A, but if you need to use the restroom first, if you need to get coffee first, do that. If nobody needs to do that, we can jump right into questions. Please don't be gentle. You asked me. Nothing? How many of you are terrified by the word podcast? Be honest. You go, ooh, something I should do. It's on my checklist somewhere. Okay. Did you have a hand back here?
Yeah, I just, the clarity piece.
Yeah?
Sometimes that's so difficult to get to.
Yeah.
Like I got all these jumble of thoughts. Ideas, and it's hard to pick one. It's hard to know where to land. Any tips there?
A couple things, yep. Get them out of your head first. Write them down. Once you've written them down, tell them to somebody. Oftentimes when you say it out loud, you get a different perspective on it. It's different types of senses. It's a great trick for learning. Whenever I was in Bible college, I was learning Greek and Hebrew. And when I was learning those, our teacher told us, when you say it out loud, you catch your own errors. And so as you're thinking of these thoughts, as you're crafting your message, write them down first. Get them out. You got to get them out of your head. If you're anything like me, my head is an absolute graveyard for good ideas if I leave them in there. So I have to write everything down. I have notebooks. Gosh, Kevin West started me on notebooks. And my notebooks are just filled with random ramblings. Now that I'm married, I have a built-in person to tell everything to. And what I'll do is I'll go to Starbucks and I'll get her a chai, because she loves chai tea lattes. And I'll set it in front of her and say, I just need you to listen for the next 15 minutes. And I'll start, and it's like right now, my whole brain right now is focused on Christmas and church world. And so I'm doing this whole program for the kids. And so I said, I just need you to listen to this. And I start telling her, and she's like, you dummy, you missed this thing. And I went, you know what? I am a dummy. I did miss that thing. Get it out of your head first. Talk to some people about it. Go back. do some workshopping on it. If you've ever done mind mapping or anything like that, it's a great tool to be able to see connections and to be able to build that out. And there's great free apps that you can use for that. Mindly is my favorite one that I use, mind.ly. It's one of my favorite ones that I use. It's just an app. You can do that. You can also just do it with paper. Get your ideas out of your head. It's a graveyard in there. They'll get lost. And so as you begin to pull those out, you can see it better. It's just all about, talk about, it's funny, clarity. It's like when you get them out of your head, you can see it more clearly. It's a great question. You guys are like middle schoolers in small group right now. For real. Talking to them about Song of Solomon or something like that, right? Talking about romance and sex and stuff, and you have all these middle schoolers sitting there like, brr! It's you right now. You're a bunch of grown-ups.
My 7th grader right now consistently his class is health.
Oh, yeah. It's wild. It's wild. Well, and when it gets even crazier in church world, right? So you have all these volunteers that are middle school, high school kids. And I'm not a scary grown-up to them. Like, I'm not their parents, or, I'm not the youth pastor who's also another scary grown-up to them. And so they'll come to me like, Todd, I have this thing and I'm wondering about it. And then they'll say the most, you go, ugh! And they'll just say it. And you're like, what is that? And you're like, I don't know. I got to Google it myself. I have no idea. These kids are saying some wild stuff, man. It's awesome. I love it. I want them to ask questions. If nothing else.
I'm curious, does anybody who has a podcast in here, anybody podcasting? Or Jordan or anybody
I'll see you after this. Yeah.
Chris, you're on one.
You done?
It's right, you're podcasting.
Podcasting is a lot of fun.
How many podcasts are you working on right now?
3. Yeah, 3. I've got 2 that I'm managing for other people, 1 that's in development. Yeah. So typically, a launch of a podcast, you can do it in a weekend, but to do it correctly, usually is about 3 months from conception to launch. Yeah. Podcasting industry is fascinating right now. So there's an old guard and a new guard, just like anything. And old guard is you build your audience first, and then you go out and you get sponsors, right? Very typical, very standard business. New guard says you don't launch the podcast until you have sponsors. So there's a fascinating thing going on right now where you've got these 20, 21-year-olds who have these brilliant ideas. By the way, if you ever want to feel dumb, go talk to some of ththese 20-year-olds that never went to college and all they've done their whole life is study YouTube videos. They will make you look stupid. And these kids have brilliant ideas. And there's this whole movement, and that's what they're doing, is they're going out and they're super niching down, right? They're super going all the way in. There's a podcast, the example that I have is there's these kids, they're in their mid-20s now, but they started this podcast about bicycling. Okay, well, that's weird. That podcast brings in $10,000 a month. Do you know why? They average 600 downloads a month. To break that down, okay, just so you understand what that number means. What's that number? Joe Rogan's podcast, which is the biggest podcast in the entire world, averages per episode, he releases 3 a week, 10 million downloads an episode, okay? Comparison, all right? 600 downloads a month, not per episode, a month. Do you know why they sell so much? Sponsorships? Because the audience they have is 600 people, or however many it is that's downloading those episodes, that are super bought in, and anything that they advertise, they're gonna buy. And they went, I don't need 10 million downloads. I need about 50 people to buy into this thing and be super niche in what I'm doing. I can sell all day.
How do they sell that to a sponsor before they have the audience?
They walk right in and they say, listen, here's my idea. And the idea is I'm building a very niche audience through this podcast. Here's my social media. I have 500 followers, but look at who it is. It's all these cyclists. It's all these people who are pretty hardcore into cycling. And say, this is who I'm going after. And they pitch it, just like anything else. And they say, here's what's going to happen with this podcast. Here are the guests that I have outlined that are going to come on. Here's the content pieces that I'm going to do that just are me talking about whatever it is. I mean, I don't know what cycling is, but whatever these niche things are about cycling. And here are the guests that are going to come on. What do you think? And if you're a smart business person, you go, oh, so if these kids get 50 people to listen to this thing that are like hardcore cyclists, and I sell, I don't know, bicycle seats, and like I sell like the best bicycle seats, yeah, I'll give them $1,000 a month for that. I'll give them $1,000 a month for that. And like they just do it 10 times. Like they just do it 10 times. And they give them, then there's different things so you can get into distribution rights on YouTube. You can do all sorts of different stuff like that. These kids are making $10,000 a month on a bicycle podcast. It's like $600 a month. It's nuts. But it's a different world. You got to just understand your value. You have to understand your audience. Again, it's storytelling, right? Understand your audience.
It's like Patreon with musicians now.
You got it.
People are
You got it.
selling a subscription to hear like you
Yep.
play your acoustic guitar in your living room.
Yeah. And the people will pay $10 a month for that, or whatever, however much it is. It's fascinating. Yeah, that's a growing world right now is the paywall side of podcasting. And every podcasts are for everybody. Every business, in my opinion, should have one. Every person who's doing solopreneur stuff should have one. It's another avenue of being able to let people see you. People care about authenticity. They care about authenticity. And the more you can give of yourself so that they can see who you are, you're gonna win. It's Gary Vaynerchuk's jab, right hook. When you jab, you let them see what you are. You're offering them free stuff. You're giving them free value and extreme value. They'll buy from you. They'll buy from you. Podcasting is a tool, just like anything else. Any other questions?
Talking about like the 5 C's stuff, do you feel like that also kind of correlates to leading people?
It does.
And having to get people to almost buy in?
Yeah. So you got the secret there, didn't you? Yeah. So transparency. These 5 C's are something that I adapted from Kevin West, actually, when I was an intern. So he's weird. He used to take us down into the basement of the church. That sounds horrible. But he used to take us down there, and he bought us each a notebook, right? If you ever know Kevin, he always has a moleskin. And so he bought us these notebooks, and he would take us down there, and he would just teach us stuff. What does that even mean? We didn't know either. We had no idea. Like, we would just go down, and he's like, here's coffee, boys. And he'd start talking. And one of his talks, he was talking about storytelling. And I was like, I'm trying to learn leadership and get into church stuff. Like, what does storytelling matter? And he had a couple of them. He had clarity, he had connection, and he had creativity. And it was like, okay, that doesn't make any sense. Then he became a children's pastor. Makes all the sense in the world. You ever try to tell a bunch of 6-year-olds about Jonah? Hello. You better get your act together. And so what I also found is, as I got further in my career, is it worked with volunteers too. You guys think you have it hard with employees? Try leading people that you don't pay. Hello. And so I realized pretty quickly, you're exactly right. These 5 C's, they lead right into leadership principles directly. I send out a weekly communication to all my leaders every single week. And in that, I usually have one call to action. What's the one thing I want you to do this weekend? Usually it's one of a couple of things, right? Find one kid, connect with them. Connect with one family. Pray with one student. Whatever it is. Cues. Tell them, hey, here's how the week's going to fold. Here's how the morning's going to go. Right? Connection. Hey, here's my number. You call me. I'll be texting you. And you just go down through the list. And so it applies directly to leadership. You are astute with that. Yeah.
There's 2 things that I resonate with what you said this morning, specifically, but the connectivity. So I've been selling furniture B2B for 18 years now.
Mm-hmm.
So I went from installing a garage door to trying to sell indoor furniture, so it was an interesting steel to hardwood.
Sure.
But a good friend of mine from Northburg said, the better you sell yourself,
Mm.
If you're good at that, you'll be all right.
Yeah.
So you let people know who you
Yeah.
are. So I resonate with what you said there.
It's true.
But this idea of connectivity, not only am I connecting to the person I'm trying to sell to, I'm trying to connect that product that's to their need. That's an interesting concept.
Yeah. When you understand business at its core, right? What is business? I have a good, you have the resource, right? It's an exchange. So why am I buying this good and giving you my resource? Because I have a problem I'm trying to solve. Marketing person, right? Your client has a resource. You have a good. Their good is they need to get their message out. It's very simple. Every business owner has to figure this out. How am I going to get my message out? There's an exchange of goods. I have to help them see that as a connection. Business is actually very simple at its core. I have to make connections with people. I want their money. They want my good. How are we going to do that? Well, first you have to have a relationship. You have to have a relationship first. It's true. It's good. Anything else? We good?
Thanks, Todd.
All hearts cleared? Good. Well, thank you so much. I'll be mingling if any of you want to talk.